Hi, everyone, and welcome to this workshop. My name is Lindy James, and really thank you so much if you attended the live workshop last week. It was really a pleasure to be with you. So, we started off by discussing how your journey is going, your teaching, reading, and spelling journey. And I asked some of you to fill in a poll. It was an anonymous poll, and here we can see that a few of you engaged with the poll, and there were quite a few of you that felt uncertain about when it comes to understanding how children learn to read and how you can facilitate and support the process in the classroom. And some of you felt confident, and there was one vote for not knowing where to start. And really, that's okay. I think being reflective and understanding where we're at is actually quite a strength. And you're joining today because you're hungry and keen to learn. So that's fantastic. And then I also asked you to think about the first thing that comes to mind when you think of reading and spelling. So you said a lot of different things here. You said phonics sounds, you said challenging. The interesting thing is that phonics sounds and challenging came out the strongest. That means that was repeated quite a lot by many of you. And what this shows me is that we understand that this is actually quite a complex process, the idea of phonics and learning to read and spell. And just to say that literacy is social justice. I really think this is important to position ourselves in understanding that, especially in our country where we've got such a big discrepancy between those that struggle with low socioeconomic status, and there is that gap between those who can read and access literacy. And when we do teach learners to read and to write, it empowers them with the knowledge and the skills they need to fully participate in society. So that needs to really spur us on to want to learn more about evidence-based practices so we can really reach all of those learners effectively. And the truth of the matter is, and I'll be transparent here, when I started teaching, it was maybe 5 or 6 years into my journey as a teacher that I realized I had this moment where I really woke up to the fact that I teach reading, but in a very haphazard way. I don't fully understand why I'm teaching, what I'm teaching, how to teach it better. And my own foundational understanding that I received in my B.Ed and even in my honors was not rich enough for me to really pinpoint strategies that I knew were proven to help learners learn how to read even when they were struggling. And so I went on this journey to build my foundation, to rebuild my foundation. And I had to do a lot of self-study, a lot of discussion, a lot of reading. And I'm still on this journey of learning and understanding more about how the brain learns to read. And I don't think I'll ever come to the end of that journey, but that's quite an amazing feeling that there's just so much to explore and to know and to learn. And as teachers, we really are the architects of our children's learning journey. And we have to know what the plan is, because if we don't, then we are leaving things up to chance. And nobody wants to do that with a child's life. We always want to do what we think and know is best for them. So just quickly, we're not going to do a deep dive into the theoretical stuff, and there are ways that you can do this, and I have created other webinars on the Twinkl website that you can dive into. But research has shown that learning to spell, which is encoding, and learning to read, which is decoding, breaking the code, they've got the same root system, not identical, but very similar. And that is systematic phonics, teaching phonics explicitly, making the implicit explicit, really teaching it with intention, and then phonemic awareness, which has to do with letter sound relationships and hearing and playing with the smallest sounds in a word. But we will go into that in greater detail during this workshop. So really, a summary of the reading process, a very, very surface level summary, would be that learning to speak is natural. It's hardwired into our brains, and we learn it naturally as we grow, as we experience the world, as we interact with older people, and we grow into this ability to speak, unless we've got something that has not happened for us developmentally that should have happened. But reading is not natural. We are not hardwired to read, and that is why the circuits for reading must be built through teaching. And the reading circuit in a brain is the same for all readers. But for people who struggle with reading, they're missing these strong connections. So what we teach and how we teach can either create and reinforce these brain connections or not. And it's wonderful that there are things that we know that research and brain scanning and amazing research has shown us can definitely help these learners. Okay, so we all learn to read in the same way. Some of us get there faster, some of us get there slower, but there's one way that we all learn to read. Now, what happens in a fluent reading brain when we read a word? So in other words, somebody that can read fluently, like you and I, let's take the word nail, for example. There is a triangular process that occurs, and that is that in less than half a second, we take the orthography, which are the letters, so N-A-I-L, we take the meaning, the semantics, and we realize, okay, it's not the nail that you bang into the wall, it's nails on your fingers. And we connect the letters and the meaning and the sound, the phonology, and we connect all those elements together, and boom, we've read and we've understood the word nail. And because in a fluent reader that takes such a short time, okay, in the beginning, when people didn't understand brain science around reading, we thought that we read by looking at a word and reading the whole word, but actually that's not how we do it. The number of letters in a word does not impact on reading time when you're a fluent reader. It kind of all happens simultaneously, but we still pay attention to every single letter. It just happens really, really fast. So that means that this thing of recognizing a word instantaneously in less than half a second, that's the end goal. But we don't get there just by looking at a word and thinking, okay, I must memorize this word. No, there's a learning pathway that we need to be taking our learners on so that they can get to that goal of recognizing words instantly like that. So instant recognition is the goal and not the starting point. So where whole language instruction is where we say, look at this word, remember this word. And that is actually not based in evidence. That's no longer seen as a good way of instructing learners and teaching learners to read. Okay,
Hi
so
everyone, and welcome to this.
Did you know that reading is
my
not
name's Lindy
inherently a
James,
visual process?
and really,
So,
thank you so
yes,
much
you
if
have
you
to
attended
attend
the
letters
live
in the word.
workshop,
Absolutely. So
last
it
week.
does
It was really a
require
pleasure
visual
to be
input,
with you.
but
It's
so,
not inherently
we
visual.
started off
by discussing how your
and
journey is
when
going,
we talk
your
about
teaching,
mapping
reading, and
words,
spelling
that
journey.
process, if you see
And
the
I
glue
asked
here,
some of
I've
you
just
to
created
fill
this little
in
picture
a
to get this
poll,
idea in
it's
your
an
mind
anonymous
that
poll.
certain words,
And
when you're
here
a
we can
fluent
see
reader,
that
you have
few
all
of you
these
engaged
words
with the
that are
poll, and there
glued
were quite a
in.
few of you that
They
felt
are yours
uncertain
forever. They are
about
mapped.
when it comes
They
to
are
understanding how
orthographically
children learn
mapped
to read and how
into
you
your
can
brain.
facilitate
They
and
are
support
yours,
the
and unless
process
you have a brain
in the
injury,
classroom,
and
they'll
some
be
of you
yours
felt
forever.
confident,
And that's what we want.
and there was one
for
word
our
for,
learners
is that they have all this store
not
of
knowing where
words
to start.
right?
And
But
really, that's
before they
okay.
get
I think
to that
being
process,
reflective and
they need to
understanding
go
where we
through a
at
lot of
is
support.
actually quite a strength,
So that they can map
you're
those
joining
words.
today because
So we used to think that words like friend and they and said, the words with irregular spellings, we used to call them sight words because we thought that learners needed to learn them just by looking at them and memorizing them. But actually, that is not called a sight word. It's actually called an irregular word because it has an irregular spelling. A sight word is a word that you know by sight. And every word wants to be a sight word when it grows up. And I will explain to you how you should approach teaching irregular spellings later on. Right. So just to illustrate the fact that reading is really all about sound mapping. It's the sound of spoken language. What does this say? It's not only made up code, it's also written right to left. Right now, nobody knows what this really says unless you've done this exercise before. So what you need to do, oh dear, it actually tells you already what it says. This was not supposed to happen, but what would you have to do in order to crack this code? Well, you need to identify the grapheme. So a grapheme is a letter symbol. So this is a letter symbol in this code. Let's try and find it. And there it is. And it's a k sound. Okay, so you know that says k. Now we look for the next one. And we can see that it's an I and the x. Okay, it looks like an X, but is it really an X in this code? No, it's a T. So what did we do? We looked for the grapheme, for the letter or the code, the symbol, and we mapped it onto a sound. And then we found out what the word was. So going back to this idea that sight words, as we previously thought of them, are actually irregular words. When we teach learners to look at words and memorize them, we are actually teaching to the wrong side of the brain where there's limited storage. So learners could perhaps memorize up to 1,000 words, who knows? But they will never be able to memorize 50,000 words or more, which is what we have in the English language. So it's not an efficient strategy. However, if we teach to the left side of the brain, there's unlimited storage space there, and it stores sounds and not shapes of words. So where we used to say, memorize this word, it's actually not an efficient strategy for teaching.
What do all these words have in common? You guessed it, they are all irregular words in terms of their spelling. They do not fit the mold of our usual spelling patterns in English. Now, what we used to do historically was say to the learners, well, I don't know how to teach you this word. It's so strange. It doesn't fit the mold. There's no rule that I can apply to it. So go home and memorize the word. Well, I'm here to tell you that there's actually a better way to do it, and that is to allow the learners to interrogate the strangeness of these irregular spellings. Spend a little bit of time on them. You don't have to go and spend an entire lesson on one of them, but give the learners a chance to interrogate and wonder why these words are so difficult to spell. Make the irregularities explicit. That is one of the ways that you can ensure learners will internalize these words. It is not by flashing them without having a chance to look at them and explain where the irregular patterns are. We have to make this happen for our learners. We have to teach irregular words explicitly.
So I'm not going to do a deep dive. This is Scarborough's reading rope. And what it is a tool for us to understand the complexity that is involved in skilled reading. Because if we understand the components and the skills that are woven into this skilled reading, we will be able to target areas of development so that we can support learners properly. So you can see that at the bottom here, word recognition, the phonological awareness, decoding, and sight recognition. All of this here is all about the mechanical skills of learning to identify what is on the page. And above that here, these bluish, purplish, greenish strands, these are all the meaning-making processes. So it's the language comprehension. And what you read, so what you decode, when you break the code of reading, you also have to understand what you're reading. Otherwise, it's not valuable to you. And that is why we say we need every single strand in this rope to be intact before we can become skilled readers. And of course, here on the left, you see self-regulation, executive functioning, all the things that a little girl or boy has to manage while they're focusing on text. It's your concentration, it's your motivation, it's all of those things. And then, of course, all these other skills on top of it. So teaching reading is really rocket science. But fortunately, we can learn more about how to move forward with our learners. Okay, so we've just established that it's incredibly important to allow learners to play with the sounds in words. A phoneme is the smallest sound in a word. So bear with me and say the word black. Now say it again, but don't say the L. What is your new word? Back. So what did you have to do right then? Well, you needed to say the word black. Then you needed to hold it in your head, use your working memory, manipulate it, remove one of the sounds, the L, take it out, and say the new word, which was back. That's a really difficult thing to do, but that is essentially what spelling is. It's being able to build words and change words. And that is a powerful tool for learners to develop when reading and spelling. So, really, as I said, reading and spelling have the same root system, and learning to play with the smallest sounds in words is really important. For example, the word dog and the word dig. What's the difference between the word dog and the word dig? One single sound, one phoneme, and it makes a marked difference. It changes the sound of the word, it changes the meaning of the word, it changes the spelling of the word. So when learners can hear those sounds, manipulate those sounds, use those sounds, their reading ability, their spelling ability will be much more powerful. So this is not obviously a handwritten example, but in my class, one of my little boys wrote this word down. And what is the word? It's jumped, right? It's jumped. Okay. And they're not wrong, because in their head they're thinking that j is ja, not j. So they've got ja, pt, and they obviously haven't got the spelling pattern for the t, the ed. But when we teach sounds, we must be careful not to add an extra sound onto the end. So a d is a d, not a da, and a j is a j, not a ja, because some children will latch onto that extra sound and they will add it to their spelling. So that's just something that I thought was worthwhile mentioning. Okay. I wonder if this is actually going to materialize. So sounds of words, phonemes, the smallest sounds in words, are like parking spaces for letters that we write. So, but if we can't hear the letters, we can't fill them in. So in order to write the word brick, you need to hear b, r, I, k, and you need to obviously know what that letter sound relationship is. So phonemes and listening to them and being able to identify them, very, very, very important. So what are some other ways that we can develop the sensitivity to the sounds of spoken language? Well, as we know, in English we have long vowels and short vowels. Now, in isiXhosa and some of the other African languages, when we say our vowel sounds, they sound slightly different. So in English, when we're saying a short vowel sound, we say a, e, I, o, a. And when we say a long vowel sound, we say A, E, I, O, U. Now, it's also important to note that when we say I for I, we don't say E, because we have A, E, I, O, U. So for the short vowel sounds, we need to be very explicit that it's A, E, I, O, A. Quite a challenge for learners to hear that subtle difference. One of the games I like to play with learners, I get the whole class on the mat and I say, listen to a long sound and a short sound. But before I do that, I sensitize them to a long vowel and a short vowel. So we do lots and lots of activities around this word has a long sound and this word has a short sound. When they are ready, we play this game called stand up, sit down vowel sounds. So I might say A, and they have to stand up. Then I say eh, and they sit down. And I say oh, and they stand up. And I say ah, and they sit down. Then I might say eh, and they stay seated. And they play this game, and it just makes them really listen very, very intently to whether I'm saying a long or a short vowel sound. Another way of sensitizing them is to say, listen to the sound of E. When you hear the sound E at the beginning of the word, touch your head. When you hear the sound E in the middle, you touch your tummy. And when you hear the sound E at the end, you touch your toes. So let's do it together. Each, each. Yes, your head. Read, read. Your tummy. Happy. That would be your feet. So, but you have to be prepared when you are doing this activity. If you do not have some chosen words on a piece of paper or on your phone next to you, you will stumble because you really have to plan. Find the words with the long sound in the beginning. Find the words with the long sound at the end and the middle before you start the activity, because sometimes it just takes a bit of time to think of them. And also with the long and the short vowel sounds, what you can do is once they know the vowel sounds as one isolated sound, you can start using words. So you'll say, I'm going to say a word, and if you hear a short vowel sound, you can stand. So at, then they will stand. Eight, they'll sit. Then eight, then they will stand. Okay? So you can build on the complexity of these activities, but it's very physical and engaging. It really gets them going. Okay, now, how would this long vowel, short vowel be applied in a way that you could assess it? Well, I like to get them to draw pictures. You don't need to worry about the spelling because in many cases you haven't taught them these spelling patterns yet. So here's an example: short A for Sam, long A for cake, my favorite, short I for kiss, and long I for ice cream. There is a Twinkl long and short sounds worksheet that looks exactly like this. I didn't use it for this example because I wasn't working with Twinkl yet, but there is a very nice example that you can download and use. And actually, if you search for long and short vowels, there's another game that's fantastic where there's a whole bunch of pictures that you can cut out, like a goat and a hat and things with long and short vowel sounds on them. And the kids must sort them into long sounds and short sounds. And that's also very practical and really, really useful. Okay, so now how do we support children who really struggle to hear and to apply their knowledge of sounds to writing words and reading words? Well, we can use concrete manipulatives, just like in maths, where we know that sometimes concrete manipulatives can support understanding. When it comes to hearing sounds in words, a little visual support can go a long way. So, for example, in a activity like this, these blocks are called Elkanon blocks, and I'm referring to the empty squares here underneath the green blocks. It's called an Elkanon box, but I like to refer to these as sound boxes. And the way that they are used is that if children are not ready to write the letters of a word, you can ask them to pull down counters to identify how many sounds are in a word. For example, with the word brick, they would pull down 4 counters, b, r, I, k. Now, if they're ready, they can go as far as to write the corresponding letters, a B, R, I, and then a CK in the last square. So it's 1 square per sound, and that just supports them. Then, as we know, sometimes learners can identify isolated sounds, but they can't blend them together. And for me, that was an absolute mystery when I was teaching learning support, that I would have a learner, and this is a true story, who could sound out the word ant by saying ant, but then would say apple to blend the word together, which means that they could identify the isolated sounds, but they couldn't blend them, couldn't put them together. And I had to think of ways to make this more explicit for them, easier for them. So one of the things that we've developed at Twinkl are these slides, and you can print them out, laminate them, and also print out the pictures of the children sliding, as you can see here. And you can either use manipulative letters, manipulatives like fridge magnets, for example, or you can actually just write the word on the slide and have the children move the children that are sliding down the slide. So from the top of the slide to the bottom of the slide, and say those sounds as the child slides down. Mat. And it just mirrors that sort of coming together smoothly, those sounds mixing. And also when you're teaching blending, use continuous sounds first. Now, what's a continuous sound? It's a sound that you can continue saying. For example, s or mm or l. The sound d is it's a stop sound. You can't continue it. But if you are teaching children to blend, especially those who struggle, start with words that begin with continuous sounds like mat. You can drag out those sounds for the learners. Then these are called successive blending strips. And I'm telling you, although it looks like an absolutely ridiculous activity, it really works. Now, it follows, it makes sense that if a learner can't blend three sounds together like b, at, bat, that you should start with two. Start with two sounds. Now, you could also use real words like at and on and am. There's nothing wrong with that. But for these, I've just chosen all the vowels and a continuous sound at the beginning. So what you will do is you will give the child only the one strip that you see here. For example, sa, se, si, so, sa. They will say the short vowel sound. Once they are fluent with this and they can blend those two sounds together, you might have to say sa, okay? Once they can do that, then you go on to adding on the consonant at the end. So they would say sat, sit. If you pull it down, you can do it like that, sit, or you can do it each consecutive consonant at the end. And sometimes they'll say a real word and other times it'll be a nonsense word that they'll be reading, and you can discuss that. But successive blending strips really do work, and they are actually good for homework once you've trained the parents in how to do it. So in other words, they're not saying say, see, sigh, so, su. They're saying sa, se, si, so, sa. Then the parents can actually do this with the learners, and you can do it in your small groups as well. Okay, just something extra for you to use to support learning. Right, now let's just go back a little bit, and just to kind of show you in this next video you're going to see, it's actually my little boy. What he does is I take him from syllabification. So in other words, if you think of the word sheep, how many syllables in the word sheep? Remember, syllables are the beats of a word. So sheep, that's one syllable, sheep. How many sounds in the word sheep? One syllable, how many sounds? How many phonemes? Sh, e, p, sheep. Three sounds. How many letters in the word sheep? Sh, e, p, five. That's quite complex, if you know what I mean. So let's just quickly listen to what David gets up to here, how he goes from syllable level all the way down to writing a word. All right, David, how many syllables in the word sheep?
Sheep.
Very good. Okay, now something slightly different. How many sounds are in the word sheep? One block per sound. Shh. And then?
E.
And then? Good. So how many sounds in sheep?
3.
Very nice. Okay, great. So now we know there are 3 sounds in sheep. Can you tell me what those sounds look like? Can you write those sounds? So let's chop our word up again. Sh, e, p, sheep. So what is the first sound? Okay, how about an E?
I think it's
Very good. And what's the last sound? Oh my goodness, that's fantastic. Well done. Magpie. Let's do it with our blocks. M, A, G, P. And then ag, P, I. Good. Now you can write it. A, G. So what I've just done there is give you practical, real-world examples of how an alkanon or sound box can be used to support writing and at the same time hearing every single sound in a word. It's quite a powerful tool for learners. Now, in the next video, in this video that you're watching here in front of you, I write words which are focus sounds that we've been dealing with for the week. So in this instance, we were focusing on the A sound and the I sound. And what I do is I ask learners to walk around while the music is playing, and then I ask them to put a dot underneath each individual sound in a word. So here you can see at the bottom of the page here, you can see the word tie has 2 dots, t, I. So when the music stops, they freeze and they put a dot underneath each sound in one word. And what it does is it enables me to see whether or not they've internalized the idea of 2 letters making one sound in some instances, and also whether they can identify how many sounds are in a word. It's matching the letter patterns and the sounds, whether they can do that. It's quite an interesting and powerful activity. Now, in the next video, you're going to witness a young boy who, in fact, was struggling quite a bit with his reading. And what I did was I gave him the language to describe a word. And by that I mean I taught them the word digraph and trigraph. That 2 letters make one sound, that's a digraph. And 3 letters that make one sound are trigraphs. And it's actually a very helpful way for learners to analyze words. So what you're going to see is a young man who tells me how many digraphs are in his word. And it's such a moment of success for him. Watch this.
I have 2 digraphs.
You do! So tell me, what does the one digraph make? What sound? And then?
The other one are.
Oh, good, like a pirate. Arr. And then the last one is not a digraph. Good. What have you got?
Sync.
Okay, talk to me about sync. How many sounds in sync?
30.
So what you could see there was, wow, he could really analyze that word. And it really gave him the language that he needed to talk about the spelling in that word. It didn't stump him, even though he was only in grade 2. Sometimes we disempower our learners by thinking they can't handle vocabulary or technical vocabulary. And sometimes it actually just sparks something in them where they're able to analyze. And I would challenge you and recommend that you start teaching the word digraph and ask your children to identify how many digraphs are in this word. Are there any digraphs in this word? And it just helps them. It gives them a language to discuss. It's definitely not a negative. Word chains are one of my favorite tools to use in a classroom. And you can do it with a whole class, you can do it in a small group, but you have to be ready, you have to be planned, you have to have a whole bunch of words that you can use sequentially that actually work in a word chain. For example, if you want, you can get a piece of paper and a pencil and an eraser. Okay, write the word sea, as in sea, you're floating on the ocean, the sea. Now change the s to a t. What's your new word? Tea. Now add a ch on the end of your word. What's the new word? Teach. So now you've got the word teach. How can you change your word to beach? Well, that would be substituting the t for the b, and there's your word beach. Now, can you change the ch in beach to a t? What's your new word? Beat. Okay, and then the final thing would be, for example, how can you change the word beat to boat? So if you have enough of those up your sleeve and you plan really well, you can use words that sounds that you've taught your children and do these exercises. And it's really amazing how flexible they become with the sounds and the corresponding letter patterns.
A, ha,
Ha.
ah,
Yes. Full stop. Very nice. Put a full stop at the end. You need to have one for the end of a sentence. Good. Full stop at the end. That means a little.
A.
All right, something a little bit different. I just want to give you a few things that I've done that have really helped me. One of the things you can do is take a phrase or a sentence that has the focus sounds in them that you've been focusing on. And you give the learners a whole sentence that hasn't been cut up, and you give them one that has been cut up. And you jumble the cut up version, and you say to them you'd like them to build the sentence and you'd like them to write it down. And so what they are doing is they're building the sentence and they're reading it aloud to you, and they are transcribing it. So they're working with it in 3 ways. They're reading, they are building it, they are transcribing it. And I find that it's a really successful group work activity. And it does take preparation, but once you have those resources at your disposal, you can use them again and again, year after year. It tends to be a very, very useful resource. And then here is something else that I find very useful. Now you'll see in the picture here on the right, I haven't used a Twinkl resource because it was before I was using Twinkl, but now Twinkl has these fantastic phrases and words. And what you can do is you can get a group of learners together. In fact, you can turn the phrases, you can print the phrases or the words depending on their level of proficiency, and you can actually turn them over so that they can't see them. And you also print animals, or you can print little monsters. They're animals in this version here for Twinkl. And you tell the learners to close their eyes, and you hide the animals underneath the phrases so they can't see which one has an animal hiding underneath it. Then they each take a turn to choose a phrase. If they pick up the phrase and it's got a monster or an animal underneath it, they can keep the monster for that game, and the person with the most monsters is the winner, or the most animals, and they have to read the phrase or the word successfully in order to keep the monster. And it's just a motivational activity to motivate children to read. And it also just means that they are not feeling anxious, which I think is quite a win, because sometimes reading connected text can cause some anxiety, which is something we don't want. And so just to end off is a funny activity that I use. I call it funny because I just think it's hilarious to watch the kids. And I'm going to show it to you and then I'll discuss it. Okay, so what you can see here are makeshift crowns that I've made out of cardboard strips, and I have written focus sentences on each, and the learners pair up. They choose a secret sentence. In other words, their partner puts the sentence onto their crown and they don't read it. They don't know what's on their head. So what happens is, if you are my partner, I will read your sentence to you that's on your head, and you'll write the sentence down. So what are you doing? The one is practicing their reading, the other is practicing their spelling, and vice versa. And then you check and you edit your sentences, and then you do the next sentence. And it's actually quite a powerful activity, which is collaborative, hilarious, everything in between. Now, I have to tell you that there are many, many other things and many other important considerations to teaching reading and spelling. This is by no means a comprehensive workshop. We cannot be comprehensive in the space of a short time like this. And so this is just a tip of the iceberg. And if you go to Twinkl Phonics South Africa and you look at the teacher training, there are some phonemic awareness videos, something on blending, something on writing. There's a whole bunch of webinars there that touch on different elements, and you're welcome to engage with those. Thank you so much for your time.